What's going on, everyone? Gareth here at FCP Euro. Welcome back to another DIY video. Today we're going to be installing these Evolve VANOS covers on this E92 M3 on the lift behind me. So if you know the deal with the VANOS covers on the S65 V8, this is going to be a very long explanation you don't need to hear, but if you don't know about this problem, what's been known to happen over time is the plastic on the VANOS covers or the VANOS hubs will expand. That plastic cover will fall into the timing cover, get ground up by the timing components, and then that ends up in your oil pan. And any foreign material inside of the oil pan that is suspended in the oil, it has a really high chance of getting picked up by the oil pickup, and if it gets picked up by the oil pickup, it could clog it and then starve your engine of oil, and then an oil starvation problem always leads up to a really bad time later on. So the entire purpose of installing these aluminum covers is to prevent that from ever being a problem to begin with, and of course the best time to solve it is before it ever happens. This example is a 50,000 mile car in the lift behind me, so chances are these covers are still fine, but there is no correlation between age and mileage. It could happen anytime, so we're going to avoid that altogether. These Evolve VANOS covers are clip-on, so we don't have to worry about taking out the VANOS central bolts and retorquing them, because that is a huge procedure. And this kit that you see right here is available on our website at fcpuro.com. It includes all of the gaskets you're going to need to replace, along with these VANOS covers. So now we talked about that, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to do this job, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so in order to put the VANOS covers on, you're gonna have to take the valve covers off. So you need a 13mm socket, 10mm socket, different sizes, T20, T25, different size ratchets, particularly a stubby quarter because access is very limited, particularly towards the back of the engine. 6mm, 7mm hose clamp driver, different extensions, pocket screwdriver, or a little mini pry bar is gonna be really helpful for undoing connectors and holding locks open, things like that. Now when it comes specifically for the VANOS covers itself, you have to take that upper timing cover off. You will need some sort of wrench, particularly for the right-hand side bank one, because there's very limited room. You're not gonna be able to use a 10mm socket on that. You also want a right angle pick or one of these multi-angle picks for working the plastic cover off, pending it's still there or has not cracked or broken. And I'm using a dead blow mallet, which is going to help tap and get those VANOS covers seated once I have it lined up. They are fairly flexible for aluminum, but they sometimes need just a little extra to get over that lip. And then past that, that's really all you need. You'll be using your hands a lot for this. Very limited access, very little room. You have to work with the car and move stuff out of the way. You'll see what we deal with when we get in there. But these are the basics of what you're going to need to do this job. So I'm going to start off by doing what we need to do to get the air box out of the way. And I'm going to start right up here with the suction hood. 2 T20 screws. Secure this to the radiator support. So I'm going to remove these. And then we have these little expanding rivets. Just using these pliers to pull the center section up. This whole forward section will slide forward. And then we have the rearward section, which will simply pull back and slide off, like so. And now we have 8 T25 screws that secure the airbox cover to the bottom of the airbox. All right, so at this point, this has a E93 cold air intake on it. Most of this procedure has been the same up to this point. The only place where this could be different is these hose clamps here. It's a 7mm drive for the E93 setup. It might be 6 for the factory clamp. I don't really remember off the top of my head. But either way, we're going to loosen this clamp. And then on your factory airbox, the filter is supported by a spring-loaded mechanism here. So you'd have to pull that plunger forward and then pull the entire piece out in one section. You know, obviously, if you have a different intake on your car, that's going to be different. And now to remove the rest of the airbox, we have 2 10mm screws that secure it to the body. So I'm going to start with the left cylinder bank. This is bank 2, so cylinders 5 through 8. We'll do each side independently because they have their own sort of constraints. You'll notice that the engine cover or this ignition coil cover on this side, our fuel feed line is connected to it, so we're going to have to pull this up and out of it, like so. We also have our secondary air pump fresh air hose that runs in the back, so that kind of hinders us a little bit. These are just held in place by some grommets. So you're going to pull up evenly, like so, and then you have to snake it forward, like so. And these are the grommets that secure the valve cover, or this little ignition coil cover, to the valve cover. So it secures here and back there. All right, so next up, we're going to disconnect our ignition coils. Simply push down on the little release here, and they should slide off fairly easily. If they're not, you could use a little pry bar to slide them back. However, I can't say, at least on these engines, I've ever had an issue with these connectors coming off. So these ignition coils do not come out very easily on this engine. BMW has a special puller tool just for these, and you don't need it, but these ignition coils are very expensive. You do not want to break one. So this is where I said, the puller is not necessary. Now I wish I had the $280 special tool from BMW, because this would save some time. But what I'm going to do is flathead screwdriver right through here, and as I'm pulling up on this, I'm also going to pull from the coil itself. There we go. Just as like a little extra, she needs a little extra encouragement. But yeah, these things are super, super tight on the spark plug. It's not really here where you have the problem, it's down there. So just finding a place to safely pry from, you just need to get these things moving. You do risk breaking that off or tweaking it sideways, so you really want to be careful. So for our right bank, or bank 1, cylinders 1 through 4, we need to pull our expansion tank forward, and we have two 10mm screws that secure the tank in location. There's a couple of grommets that secure the tank in place, but you can basically pull this whole thing forward. Just be really careful with this line underneath and the return line here. You can get quite a bit of angle on these things and really work it forward so that it is completely out of the way. So we do have a level sensor here. We want to disconnect it. And if you have a good expansion tank and good connections, it won't leak coolant all over the place. So now we need to remove the ignition coil cover here. Same thing as the other side, just held in with a couple of grommets. So pull up and slide this forward. Again, you would not be able to do that if you left the expansion tank in the way, plus it frees up a lot of space. Similar process here. I'm going to use any pry point available and get the coils moving. Once they're moving, they fairly come out, reasonably easy, but not really. You just got to break that initial seal. So at this point, with the expansion tank pulled forward, which we're going to have to do anyway, we are going to disconnect the air temperature sensor here from the front of the intake manifold, and now we have 9 connections. Actually, I'm sorry, 10. There's another sensor, another vacuum line rather, directly underneath the intake plenum here in the front, and then we have 8 plenum couplers, which are secured with a 6mm clamp, and then there is a breather vent, or a vent in the back of the plenum, which you can only get access to once you've loosened up the plenum from the couplers. So from this point, we should be able to lift the plenum up off the couplers, like so. Remember, we have this line here towards the front, which actually just kind of came off, so that's convenient. And now we have this additional connection here in the rear, which you can't really see. I'll show you once the plenum's off. You kind of have to go in with your fingers. It's this style clamp that you're going to have to press, while also wiggling the manifold off. You heard it just release. Kind of inconvenient. That rear one has been known to catch people off from time to time. And then just pull the plenum out, like so. And this is the hose I was talking about in the rear. So you have to reach in and depress those tabs to get it to release. And then this was the additional line up here that you have to disconnect. In my case, it disconnected itself somehow. That's a little unusual, but that's fine. So our next step here, depending on your approach here, we took out the coils first because we're doing some other work before we got into this video. This is where you'd pull the coils out, but we do need to disconnect our cam sensors. We're gonna have to disconnect our fuel injectors and all of the other wiring harness stuff that is attached here. We got a couple of grounds. So I'm gonna start here at our cam position sensors up front. So looking down our side here, we'll just pull our wiring harness out of these little holders. And if you look right here, we have this mounting point for the ignition coil cover. That is also a grounding point for our harness, so I'm gonna have to remove that nut. So it is a 13 millimeter, you're gonna need to use a deep socket. These are not very tight. It's just a ground. We're gonna look here at the back. Just generally need to make sure that we get this wiring harness dislodged from the coil, from the cover, which it now is. These locks for these connectors from BMW are awful. You have to basically pull it off to the side. And these clips are also known to sometimes disappear in the engine bay. So basically just pull it down off to the side like that. You have to do it on both sides. Fortunately, there's pretty decent access here once the plenum is off. But it's still kind of a fiddly design. And, you know, these connectors, I'm pretty sure, originate back into the early 90s. I've worked on E36s that have the same style setup for their fuel injector connectors. These come off very easily. And what I do is I make sure that I reseat these locks, because you can reconnect these connectors with the locks in place, and then you don't have to worry about one of them falling off and disappearing. And I would say that's probably important on this application because, as you can see, this harness is very loose. It's not a rigid piece, so I would not rely on the harness itself to keep the connector plugged in. We do have a 10 millimeter nut right here, which secures our harness ground to the valve cover, so I'm gonna loosen that up now. At this point, before I move to the other side, I'm gonna remove our bank 2 valve cover now. All of these valve cover nuts are screws really, are 10 millimeter. So we're just gonna go around the perimeter and loosen them all. Fortunately on this engine, there's no internal, like none on the inside, so they're all perimeter, which makes it a little bit easier. Now that all of our valve cover screws are loose, including that one in the back, I'm just gonna rock it like so. And there we go, valve cover's out. Order of operations is gonna be the same here on bank 1, which is the right side. Only thing we don't really have to deal with is our evap line and the secondary air pump, fresh air supply hose, and a bunch of other stuff. So this side will be a little bit more straightforward to deal with, but still gonna have the same problems with these connectors that have never been touched. They can be stubborn, so just take your time. So we're over here. We're going to show you how to do this on the right side of the engine, bank 1. This is going to be the most difficult side just because of the oil filter housing and the expansion tank. I'll just move the expansion tank back over here. We also have this electrical conduit that sits here at the front of the timing cover, which is blocking access to 2 of the screws, and also we can't pull the cover off unless those are removed. So I'm going to start with the conduit, and I'm going to try a different approach here using these hose clamp pliers or these hose pliers rather, that worked really well. So I'm just using these pliers to open the jaws on these clips, basically just work underneath it. So kind of push that down and out of the way. And then from here, there's gonna be 4 10mm screws. One here, one here, one here, and then one down here on this low side. Just to be able to pull that front timing cover, you need to be able to move the expansion tank out of the way to get to this bolt over here, or the screw. AC line is in the way. The shape of the cover makes it impossible to get anything other than a wrench on it. So again, you're gonna have to move some stuff around. This is a difficult side just because of some of the AC lines and the coolant hoses, whereas the left side is pretty much straightforward as you can get. So from here, we should be able to pull this cover off. Dowels might be stubborn, or at least one of them could be, so just be ready for that. Could be some corrosion in there, you know. Steel dowel, aluminum cover, galvanic corrosion, these things happen. This is rocket and should come off like that. And then we have our gasket underneath it. You do not want to double gasket this, that will leak like crazy. Here's the thing that we're here to remove. This is the plastic cover on the VANOS Hub, or cam adjuster, whatever you'd like to call it. These have been known to swell and then fall off. So it's a piece of plastic and it clips in place. So we're just gonna pry it off. And just as a safety, I'm gonna use a lint-free shop towel, and I'm gonna put it down here in the opening of our timing cover to make sure that any plastic doesn't fall down inside the timing cover. I don't want that. So yeah, so that one came off with a little bit of anger, but that's why we put the towel down there in the front of the timing cover so nothing can fall into it. If you look at the new VANOS Hub cover from Evolve, you have these alignment tabs. So there's a giant notch here at the top, and then you have some smaller ones at the side. So there's 6 of them. So every 60 degrees, there's an alignment mark where you just have to line, and then there's a ledge past where they clip into. So now we're just gonna slide this back in. Again, this is the worst side to do this on. The other side will be a lot easier. We already have the gasket slipped into place. We will lower the timing cover into place like so. And then we will start threading the screws in. Torque spec on these would be 10 Newton meters, but if I'm being completely candid with you, there's no way we're putting a torque wrench on any of these. There's no room for it. So we're just gonna use some common sense and feel for these screws to get tight. The gasket is what makes the seal, so we don't really need to tighten these too much. All right, yeah, we're already moving light speed on this side compared to the other side, primarily because we don't have, you know, AC lines, coolant lines, oil filter housing, you know, miscellaneous things. I'm gonna take a little bit of RTV and coat the edges here. It's generally good practice anytime you have 2 mating surfaces to use RTV, because there could be some irregularities between those surfaces. Okay, we're taking our valve cover assembly and we're gonna go ahead and drop it into position. Obviously we wanna make sure that we get it seated into position first before we try to push it down. The spark plug tubes will sort of line up, and then once they're lined up, push the entire assembly down. Also want to make sure that the wiring harness at the back doesn't get pinched. because the last thing you want is your wiring harness inside the freaking engine. So we got bank 1 valve cover installed. Torque spec is 10 Newton meters for the screws. You can only really get to a handful of them with the torque wrench. The further back in the engine bay you go, the less room you're gonna have. So my recommendation is tighten everything down evenly, start from the middle, work your way out in a rotating pattern, then go around the perimeter one more time. I'm using this really short 1/4 inch ratchet, 10 millimeter. Basically, I have my thumb and my finger here, and I'm feeling for it to bite down and get tight. Once the screws are evenly tightened, which you'll be able to feel, you don't really have to go further than that. All you're trying to do is make sure that the gasket is sitting flat and evenly pressured. If you have any kind of situation where it's not, that's where you get leaks from. Again, in an ideal world, you'd be able to go in there with a torque wrench. There just isn't really that much room in there, and you're not really gonna get an accurate swing with the torque wrench anyway. So this is where we really recommend having a short 1/4 inch drive ratchet and really just feel for it. We got the valve cover in. I'm gonna go ahead and actually lay the harness back on and reconnect the grounds, and then we'll move over to bank 2, which is the left side. So here on bank 1, which is the right side, your ground stud is gonna be directly behind the breather box here, and then you have this ground stud right here, which is also one of the mounting points for the ignition coil cover. Remember from earlier, so. And then the main ground on the valve cover is just that 13 millimeter nut, which is also that ball stud for the ignition coil cover. Doesn't have to be tight, just, you know, reasonable. Now we'll just click our injectors back on. So pre-installing the lock kind of gives you that nice audible click, and you can watch them drop into place. This thing is extremely important on this injector harness because it's not tied down to the valve cover. So if any of these was loose, you would find out very quick. So at least on this side, you'll be able to see the RTV placement. Just a little dollop will do you. That was a little bit more than a dollop. So we'll just use the excess dollop right there. So that, in my book, is way too much. So just wipe the excess. You know, all that is just to take up an imperfection between those two mating surfaces. Classic BMW right there, where the front timing cover is separate from the cylinder head. You're gonna have to do that. Now we're gonna take our NRW valve cover, we're gonna bring it in from low, and we need to get it in the breather past the fuel feed line, which fortunately is flexible and works with us to a degree. So we're just doing the same thing that we did on the other side. We'd have to reroute our wiring harness and secure it back into the bosses that are on the valve cover. You know, again, NRW did mimic the design of the factory valve covers. It's replicas, so these are going to latch onto the exact same places. All right, valve covers are installed. So before we put the plenum back on and start butting everything up, I'm going to replace these original factory rubber couplers with the silicone couplers from NRW Design. Made sense going in this deep to replace the next weak link, which would be these rubber couplers. So I'm just going to pull these clamps off. We'll reuse these when we put the new couplers on. But for now, get them out of the way. So the factory couplers are held on with these Etiker clamps, which we're gonna have to cut to remove. That's fine. This is the original coupler. And over time, depending on how often you've removed these, you'll get like deformation here where the hose clamp bites down. The sealing surface in here might get chewed up. And while this is a MAP sensor engine, so you could deal with a vacuum leak, you really don't want it because this will ingest dirt and other debris potentially. So these will wear out over time, and while you're doing any kind of service work that requires the plenum coming off, it makes sense to me to install these upgraded silicone couplers, which are gonna handle exposure to heat a little bit better than the rubber will. And I mean, you can see in a couple areas here, they've worn down significantly. NRW mimicked the factory design with the stoppers, so you don't have to worry about any kind of problems later on when you're dealing with the plenum going back on. So you go to put the new piece back on, you're going to make sure that these are clocked correctly. So you see this little notch, it'll go on like that, and then this will also line up with the backing for the other hose clamp where you get access for the fuel rail. And NRW provides you more traditional style worm drive clamps, which are perfectly fine for this. You don't need Etiker clamps. And my recommendation on these is going to be to clock them facing forward. That way they don't interfere with the throttle actuators. And the included clamps are 7mm drive, or you can use a flathead screwdriver, but. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put our plenum back in. Need to make sure that this hose in the back connects to the plenum. Torque spec, by the way, for the intake plenum is 1 Newton meter. To the intake plenum couplers, you need a very specific torque wrench to do that. So at this point, we need to reinstall the ignition coils. I'm going to start at the back of the engine because that is by far the worst, and then we will work our way towards the front. So. So at this point, I did start the car briefly, no misfires. Really important to make sure those ignition coils are seated. And then once you have confirmed that they are seated by the car running and not misfiring, we are going to reinstall our ignition coil covers. So those go push in the grommets like so. And then you have a little holder there for that. And then after that, we can reposition our expansion tank. There's a little stud that has to sit in a grommet, and then once that's in place, we'll reinstall the two 10mm screws. All right, we'll drop the base of our air box in. All right, so that's how you go about installing the VANOS covers, the clip-on style Ford S65 V8 in a 2008 to 2013 M3, E90, E92, E93. In this case, we use the valve covers, which secure on very nicely. Hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions or comments, leave in the comment box below. If you like this video, hit the like button. You'll also want to hit subscribe because we have a lot of videos on the way. And as always, we'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.